I'm Patrick O'Hare, president of the Friends of Ludington State Park. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's event, our Zoom session, the first one for the 2023 season. So I'm not going to do a big introduction for Brad. I think many of you know Brad and his dad, Todd. Todd's in warmer space this evening, if I'm not mistaken, isn't he, Brad?
Correct. Yeah, he's in Venice Beach, Florida.
Yeah, well, somebody had to go, right?
Yes.
Do you want to do a screen share and do an introduction and start? We're very pleased that you agreed to do tonight's session for us. And as you can see, there's quite a few people that have signed up for it.
Well, I appreciate y'all joining us. And like Patrick said, my dad is in Florida with my stepmom, Debbie, at Venice Beach. They're renting a condo for the next couple months. And Rachel, our partner and fellow shooter, a third of these images we're going to see tonight are hers. She is in MESIC right now at her daughter's 8th grade basketball game. So I'm flying solo tonight, and Rachel is usually our technical person. So we're hoping this all goes smoothly. We are just blessed, as most of you are, to live in this area and to have the ability to visit Ludington State Park at very little cost. And it's one of the blessings of Michigan. It's really one of the blessings of the whole Midwest. And my dad and I and Rachel just are continuously feel so grateful to be able to spend time out at the Queen of the North. Back in 2007, my dad and I did a book on Ludington State Park. We were out there almost every day. And it allowed us to get to parts of the park we had never been to. I was one of the fortunate kids growing up here that my parents took us out to the state park often, and it was just part of life. And I just kind of assumed everybody did. Back in the day when I was an elementary school teacher at South Hamlin, I remember I had the students, 6th graders, raise their hand who had been out to Ludington State Park. Maybe only 4 or 5 of my students raised their hand, and it just floored me. And it was very eye-opening that a lot of people right here in this area, right in Mason County, don't even have the ability or take the time to go out to the state park. And that's where groups like Friends of the State Park have been so beneficial to get the word out about how beautiful and resourceful the park is. And one of the things we also appreciate about our Ludington State Park is the staff. Everybody out there, it doesn't matter if you're a tourist from a foreign country or a tourist from another state or somewhere from Michigan or a local, they treat everybody with respect and they bend over backwards to help people. And that doesn't happen at every park that you visit. And I think that's really one of the things that sets our park apart. Not only is it extraordinarily beautiful, we have Lake Michigan, we have the dunes, we have Hammond Lake, we have all the really well-marked trails. We're blessed with an incredible staff out there. They just run a tight ship, and when things go wrong, they jump to it. We had a workshop student get hurt one time, and I had to go sprinting for help, and it didn't take long for firemen and all kinds of people to be there helping us. So hats off to any of the staff that happens to be watching this video. The way tonight will go is I'm going to show, I think it's about a 14-minute movie that Rachel put together today. It's with a lot of our best images from the state park, including several brand new ones that nobody had seen until this week on Facebook. They're shots from 2022 that my dad, Rachel, and I have taken, plus a lot of our Goldie Oldies and a lot of your favorites that you'll see. Rachel built this movie and set it to music. Once that's done, the favorite part and really the purpose of tonight is the question and answer. We love doing this. We pride ourselves on keeping no photographic secrets. So we will answer any questions you have, and don't be shy. And that's kind of one beauty of Zoom is some people that tend to be shy. The camera and the keyboard kind of takes that out. So I look forward to that. We're going to try watching this movie right now, and then we'll answer questions. like I said, those images were all by my dad, Rachel and I, spanning for my dad. Some of those might have been 20, 30 years old, all the way up to current. And for me, pretty much from 2004 on, Rachel, more like 2015 on to the present. Now what we want to do is just open it to questions, and we want to hear from you. And again, we pride ourselves in no photographic secrets. So if there was a specific image you saw, if you could describe it, I can answer that, or things about equipment, any questions you have, we can try to answer that. And Patrick can feed me questions, however that works, and we'll go from there. Is Patrick there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, no. If you if anyone wants to post a question in the chat as well, or I can unmute, but you'll probably need to raise your hand in order for me to be able to unmute you. You can try to unmute yourself in the bottom left-hand corner if you're familiar with Zoom. Brad, do you have a favorite season in terms of photography at the state park?
We do. If you can see the two images behind me, there's that one, and then there's one over here. We love the fall at Ludington State Park. October and November are our favorite 2 months. It used to be pretty much the whole month of November, but as things have changed in climate schedules, now we're more like middle of October to middle of November is when we find the best light. So there's more shadows. You get more what we call magic light, where it might be raining but the sun is out. You get intense colors that are so intense they don't look real, and that's one of the big things. People come in the gallery or see our work online and they're like, oh, these photos are fake, or those colors aren't real. And for some of you that have spent a lot of time out at the state park, you know they're real. They're just rare moments. It doesn't look like that every night. It might look like that 3 nights out of the year. It's our job to be there when it's just absolutely glorious. So the other thing about October, November is the dune grass is blooming, so it gets all puffy. You get white billowy clouds, and where there aren't clouds, you often get crystal clear blue skies. The fall color is obviously spectacular. We find the Ludington State Park is one of the very last places in the whole area to peak. It's usually not until Halloween, or sometimes even a few days after Halloween. And on years like that, you just hope you don't get one of those huge blows in October that takes all the leaves down. But definitely the fall. And then I would say probably the second for both of us, my dad and I, and now Rachel, is the winter. We're winter people. This winter has been kind of miserable. It's looked like March all winter for the most part, and March is our least favorite month. Everything's brown and looks dead and muddy, and this winter has been a little bit depressing and hard for a lot of people. We say there's no bad weather, there's just bad equipment or bad gear or bad clothing. So we dress for success, and the cold doesn't bother us. And if it's going to be winter, we just prefer to have a whole bunch of snow. I remember back in 2014, so it was like January or February. And if you remember that winter of 13-14, that was like a real winter back from like the 70s or 80s when I was a kid. But I snowshoed out to Big Point Sable, and I went down the utility road, and I had my sister-in-law's snowshoes on, and my snowshoe sank, and I couldn't get it out of the snow, and I realized it was caught on the top of a pine tree. That's how high this drift was. I was about 13 or 14 feet up in the air for almost a mile, and I didn't even realize how high I was. And then I realized, oh man, I might be here a while. So I had to dig down and get my snowshoe off and undig it. And I literally crawled on my hands and knees up over the dune and got out onto Lake Michigan, out onto the ice. And then from there, I could walk pretty easily out to Big Point Sabo. But I thought I was going to be stuck there. So we love the fall and the winter. Spring would be our third choice. We love when the park comes back to life and you see a lot of the wildlife and that. And then summer is probably our least favorite time, just because it's more hazy. The color isn't as good. You know, the sunrise is so early and the sunset is so late. It's hard to shoot it. And but it's still beautiful.
Brad, are you going to be using screen sharing at all? Do you need to display anything? And if not, can you turn it off so that you, I think some individuals aren't familiar with being able to do side by side on the.
Oh, okay. So I
if
just
you could-
stop
if you
share.
can, unless you need your screen share.
Okay,
Um,
how's that?
that, yeah. And for those of you that, you know, you can change your view on, each person can change what they're seeing on their particular computer and so forth by typically it's the upper right hand corner. There's a view button that you can adjust. There's quite a few questions in terms of lenses regarding what lens you'd recommend for somebody to carry, what type of lens that you're using and so forth. You want to just spend a couple minutes talking about
Sure.
all the equipment that you've accumulated over the years?
Yep. So the three basic lenses that we carry are a wide angle, so a 14 millimeter to a 24 millimeter. It's a zoom lens. At 14, it shows you a whole lot of the earth at one time, and we use those a lot for those Lake Michigan sunsets where we're right down by the water's edge and getting that immediacy, but we still want to show you a whole lot, or a big dunescape where you're seeing a ton of the dune. Then the next lens we carry is a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. So that's kind of our mid-range lens. Like tomorrow, Rachel and I are flying to Florida to visit my dad and Debbie. We're only bringing one lens each. So she'll bring the 14 to 24 on her camera body. I'll bring the 24 to 70. And for most travel photography, those two lenses will do the job. Then you get into your specialty lenses with your bigger telephotos. So either a 70 to 200 millimeter, that's a really common lens. We now have switched to a 60 millimeter to 600. So it goes from almost a standard 50 millimeter lens and goes all the way out to 600 millimeters. The beauty of that lens is it obviously magnifies greatly at 600 for wildlife and bald eagles and that, but it's not going to break the bank and it's not super heavy. My previous lens was 13 pounds. It took its own special tripod and it costs more than most used cars today. So we've gotten rid of those lenses and we've gotten more affordable zoom lenses that are a huge zoom from 60 to 600, and they do the job just as well.
You have a lot of questions in terms of certain particular photos that you've taken. One of the questions is how were you able to get the wavy, if I can find that question again, the waves in terms of the blurred waves? How did you get the blurry waves?
Okay. Rachel has become the best at those, but it's cameras on the tripod. So most of our shooting is done on a tripod and it's a long exposure. So the shutter speed is accumulating light for maybe a half a second to 4 or 5 seconds to even 30 seconds. So with the camera on the tripod, you get parts of the photo that are very sharp and very still. And then the moving parts of the image, like the water, or sometimes the stars spinning the circle, that kind of thing. The moving parts are literally painting across the sensor, and that's how we get those. The shots that are in the water, which there were a few in there, I think, with the underwater housing. Those are with a special housing where my old Nikon D7000 goes into this special housing, and then I either put on a survival suit or a life jacket. I always have one or the other. And then I am tied to shore. So I'm either tied to my dad or Rachel or a big tree. At the city beach, I tie myself to the picnic tables that are down there. But we always try to proceed with caution. My dad's 33 years in the Coast Guard, taught us that. And Lake Michigan devours its wounded. So we don't mess around with that. But that's how we get those shots. We like to teach all of our workshop students and my students out at West Shore immediacy. When you think you're close enough, move closer, and then move closer again, and then move closer again until you physically can't get any closer. And that's how I ended up with the underwater housing. I kept wanting to get in the water, and there's a heron shot there that was in this, where it's an orange sunset with a silhouette of a great blue heron. It was actually the cover of our Ludington State Park book. And I actually got in the Sabo River, and and I'm not a super tall guy. I was up to my neck, had the camera on the tripod as high as it would go. And my camera was only 6 inches over the water. And that's how I got that perspective with the heron reflected. And it was always getting more and more close to the water. And finally, a friend stepped forward and gave us an underwater housing. And that allowed me to actually get in the water. And it didn't matter if my camera got wet at that point.
Somebody asked about the question or the photo that you took of the fish. I assume it was on one of those times when you were.
There's my dad's most famous fish shot. We call it goldfish, but it's a king salmon underneath the water. And the water was all ripply that day. It was a windy day and it was a really sunny day. So the fall color wasn't any good to photograph, but fall color on a really sunny day, the best way to photograph that is shooting reflection. So that fall color is reflected on that ripply water. And then my dad had tried to make that image for the first 30 years of his career shooting film, and he could never pull it off because the film wasn't fast enough. And if he used fast film to freeze the water ripples, it was so grainy and it had no color, it didn't look good. Fast forward to the mid 2000s when we got good digital SLRs, my dad could what we call rob the ISO bank, raise that up, take that light and put it into a shutter speed and freeze those water ripples, but still get good color and saturation and low noise. And that's his image. And then there's a brand new one in there that I shot this fall with my students from West Shore. And we were standing on the Sabo River Bridge, shooting straight down at a huge, it was the largest school of king salmon I've ever seen. And I'm only showing part of it. And in that photo, there's probably 30 of them, but there were probably 400 in this school. And the reason I liked this scene was they looked like ghost fish, and just the temperature of the water and the way the light was refracting, the fish looked almost blue. They looked like blue demon fish. And so it was fun to photograph that. And that's probably my favorite photo that I've gotten in 2020. I did Motivational Monday, so I shot every Monday of last year. And that was on a Monday. And I think it's probably my coolest, best shot. And I was glad I was at Ludington State Park.
There's a question about the Northern Lights in Ludington and how often they're visible, and any photography tips that you might have for shooting them.
Yeah, a lot of our Northern Light shots are out at Ludington State Park. What gets hard now because of social media is when they're predicted, there's a huge influx of people out at the park, and the state park has a rule, they don't let people in after a certain time of night. So I don't remember if it's 9 or 10 p.m. and the only way you can be in the park after that point is if you're a registered camper. So it's gotten really hard to shoot the Northern Lights out there. And what I tell people and what I told my students at West Shore is, if you have the time and the ability and they're predicting the Northern Lights are going to be really good, go register and get a campsite out at Ludington State Park during the day, and pull your car in, set up camp, and then go shoot that night, and then you can explore the park. and you're not breaking any rules. Sergeant Sands has made it more difficult when it's all lit up at night. You used to be able to shoot the northern lights really well at the first or second curve, but that operation, when it's lit up, the light pollution obviously drowns out the northern lights. So that's a good question. It's gotten a lot harder than it used to be. We use Aurora Pro. It's a cool app you can get on your phone. It's a few bucks, and it'll alert you when the northern lights are out or going to be out. And between that and social media and people just calling us on our cell phones, that's how we track the northern lights. And I've seen them every month of the year. There are certain seasons where they can be better. In this area, they tend to be better in the winter because it's colder and there's less haze. And we say Lake Michigan is a cloud factory, so we get a lot of clouds along the lakeshore. That's why over in Cadillac or the middle of the state, they'll see the northern lights better than we do sometimes because of all the clouds. But the best show we've ever seen was December. Second best show was April. Third best show was July. So we've seen them every month, and they seem to be more prevalent than they used to be.
So since the question was in terms of any recommendations in terms of shooting them, when you've seen them in the different seasons, how do you adjust in terms of, or do you have a default setting that you typically try to use for northern lights?
Good question. Usually I would say 800 ISO f8 on your lens for your aperture, and then your shutter speed start at 2 minutes, and that'll probably get you in the ballpark if the lights are visible and good that night. If they're really visible, you can give less time. You might get away with a 30-second exposure. If they're not super visible, you might need to shoot for 4 minutes. And if you want those star trails, you're talking 32 to 40 minutes. And that's so real low ISO, a smaller aperture hole, and then you're accumulating light with your shutter speed. So you're accumulating light over several minutes, and that's how you get the star trail.
There's a question in terms of what general area of the park is that tree that the Four Seasons were shot through located?
That is a good question. We take all our workshop students there for our Picture Perfect workshop. And if you go to the very north end of Beechwood Campground, there is a wooded path that's very clearly marked, and it heads straight north, and the tall ridge dune is on your left, and the inlet of Lost Lake is on your right, and you just head north down that trail, and maybe 100 yards in front of the big huge steps that go up the ridge, there is a small boardwalk that goes only to the right. Take that little boardwalk to the edge of Lost Lake, and that tree is right on your right hand side, right in front of a bench there. And we call it the Todd Reed eyeball tree. And we've all photographed it in every season, but that's kind of my dad's baby. We let him have that one.
You might have already touched on this based on having memorized the slide or the video, but there's a question of where was the last picture shot? I have a clue as to what it was, so
I can't remember what the last one was either. If they can give me any descriptions, I would
there
know.
was a question in terms of whether or not any of these images that you're describing right now, if you'd want to go back to share a screen and bring them up, but
it's going to be hard because they're all in movie format. I don't have the folder.
Yeah.
With the individual images on this computer. They're on the server.
Someone asked you, do you have a default exposure setting for sunset images, like 2 stops underexposed or 1 stop, etc.?
Well, the confusing part for most people is when you're shooting into the sun, you actually have to generally go to the plus side of your meter. You actually have to overexpose if the ball of sun is in your photo. And often the bigger the lens, the bigger the sun, bigger part of the photo, the more you may actually have to overexpose and go to the plus side of your meter. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but your camera is trying to make everything gray or a mid-tone. And so when it sees a ball of sun, it says, whoa, there's a lot of light, and it tries to darken the whole scene. And you'll get real dramatic orange and red sunsets on your phone or your camera. And at first you think that's really cool, but you're not seeing and you're not capturing what's there. And the worst part is you're only turning on 1/5 of your pixels. 4/5 of your pixels live in the last part of your histogram. And the only way to turn those on is to expose them. And generally, to expose those, you have to go to the plus side of your meter. And those are all things we teach in our weekend workshop. And now we do because of COVID, one of the blessings of COVID was it forced us to do an online version of our workshop. So you can go to our website, download the Picture Perfect video series, I believe it's called. And it's a 7.5-hour video series that takes you through how to use your camera in full manual. So the stuff I'm talking about tonight, if it sounds like a foreign language to you, watch that video. The other half of that video is our 2020 vision. So the 20 concepts my dad and Rachel and I use to build our images. So you get the art and the vision, and it's all the same information you get at the in-person workshop that we do at the Lamplighter Bed and Breakfast.
There's a question in terms of, is there a place in the park that is less known that you enjoy photographing?
Yes, I love when you get to the way north east corner of the park and you're near the warming hut up there just below the dunes. I actually love to go past the warming hut up that super steep dune. And when you get up there, you're looking at kind of the border of Ludington State Park. You're looking north towards North House Dunes. You can see Lake Michigan on your left, and you can see Hammond Lake and the Hammond Lake Dunes that everybody likes to go boating to. You can see it all in one spot, and there's these cool trees up there. I call them Joshua trees. They're not really Joshua trees, but that's what they look like, and their roots are all exposed. And back in the day when my brother was on one of his deployments to Iraq, that was kind of my happy place. And I would go sit up there and kind of ponder the world and send him good vibes. So that's a really special spot for me. I know Rachel loves just shooting the wildlife along the Sabo River near the pedestrian bridge and that area. And then, of course, all three of us would say Big Point Sabo. My dad grew up deer hunting at the North House Dunes when you used to be able to drive into the North House Dunes. And then after that, they would drive to Big Point Sabo and deer hunt out there. And then being in the Coast Guard all those years, he actually did some duty stuff out at the lighthouse when it was part of the U.S. Coast Guard. And now with the Friends of the State Park, we do a lot of work with them and with lighthouse keepers. And so we love spending time out by Big Point Sabo Lighthouse.
I don't think this question is necessarily limited to the park, but it's asking, if you had a limited amount of time, what would be your go-to spot to photograph?
Oh man, I can't tell you how many times we rush out to the park and just park near the first or second curve right there along M116 and get down there by the jetties. So, you know, if you don't have a lot of time, it's an extraordinary place and it always looks different. I swear, every time you go, you get a different view. And it's very accessible. Another is just by the beach house, exploring that whole area. Just north of the beach house, at the end of the parking lot, there are two dunes. There's one dune that's pretty tall, and then there's a second dune just to the north of that that's a little bit taller. And when you get on that dune and look straight north, you can see Big Point Sabo Lighthouse. And there's a shot in the show of the northern lights spinning in a circle, and down low you see a bright beacon. That is from the top of that dune looking at Big Point Sabo Lighthouse. And that dune is I think one of the best views in North America.
Somebody asked the question, do you still use film at all?
No, haven't shot film since January of '04. So we've been strictly digital, and the digital cameras just keep getting better and better. And our whole MO is we try to show the world as God created it. And a digital camera allows you to do that so much better than any film camera ever could.
There's a question about your video workshop as it relates to, in it, you apparently state that if you have a lens that has infinity option, this is best for shooting northern lights and or dark sky. Can you explain this a bit more? And you touched on that in terms of some of the aperture issues, but
Yeah, the best way to learn that is to go to YouTube. YouTube is just a sensational thing. So don't just go to Google. Actually, Google YouTube, go into YouTube's browser, and in YouTube's browser, type in that question, and there will be probably 6 videos to choose from to show you how to get your lens on manual focus to infinity, and what that actually means. But infinity is a little snowman thing, and the center of that snowman, you want to line up the white mark on the end of your lens with the center of that snowman mark on your focus ring, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, check out YouTube and it'll give you the answer.
Somebody's asking, and you teach at West Shore, but they're asking a question as it relates to youth. And how would you suggest getting them into photography?
What is so amazing today is that a lot of the best photographers and videographers are 18 years and younger, because they've been inundated with it their whole life, and with their cell phones and their iPads and different things at school. And they're exceptionally good at it. They're uninhibited, and they don't have fear, and they don't have nearly as much fear of rejection as adults do. They're not afraid of criticism. So we're actually finding that more and more of our workshop students are getting younger and younger. My daughter took our workshop when she was 9 years old, and she's been shooting on full manual ever since, and she's 17 now. And she's extraordinary with her camera. And now my son Ethan is getting into it too. So Rachel and I love taking our 5 kids on shooting trips, and I hope more and more kids go into this. I have several students this semester out at West Shore that are hoping to do photography at least as part of their career. And because of social media and the video world and the visual world we're living in more and more, photography is finally getting its place in the art world. Forever, people would come in here, we'd have people come in and be like, where's the art gallery in town? And, their nose 6 feet in the air and all snooty. And we like, well, you're in an art gallery right now. This is fine art. And for a lot of people, that was just a hard thing to choke. But because of the advent of cell phones and cell phone cameras, photography is now no longer the stepchild of the art world. And they're going to learn that photography is going to surpass probably all other art forms, photography and video, and will be more respected than painting or drawing or sculpting or anything. We're big believers in supporting all of the arts. That's why we're so involved with the Art Center and other organizations, culinary arts, any kind of art, and everybody's an artist. And we want to help encourage that and bring that out in people.
Somebody's asking, you mentioned dressing for winter shooting. Any tips on outdoor winter clothing, especially gloves?
Gloves are the hardest part. My dad and I always joke that every store we go into, whether it's Meijer, Walmart, all the way to Cabela's or anything in between, we try on endless amounts of gloves. It's hard to find the perfect glove that gives you the flexibility to operate your camera on full manual, but to still keep your fingers warm. And the best I have found, they're called Level. That's the brand, Level. They're a ski racing glove, and they have a lot of different versions. These are their softest versions. So they're Gore-Tex, they're fully waterproof. I actually had them at the car wash last week, cleaning off some of my boots, and I was holding them and my hand never got wet, even with the full force of the car wash wand hitting it. They're pretty extraordinary. They're not cheap. They're probably $180 pair of gloves, but I'm on my third set, and I may invest in a few more in case they change that model or I can't find them anymore, because they're the one glove I have found that I can operate my camera, but my hands don't freeze.
There's a couple of questions related to cameras. One is about recommending a good first camera body, and then there's another one asking if you use a mirrorless camera, and then they are also wondering if you can explain the different camera sensor sizes and which size is best. So camera body, mirrorless cameras, and then if you can explain camera sensor sizes and which size is best.
Rachel, my dad and I use the Nikon D850. That's Nikon's biggest sensor they make in a digital SLR format. It's really made for landscape photography or wildlife photography. Has a huge sensor. It's now maybe 6 years old, 7-year-old technology. But unfortunately, Nikon and Canon and a lot of them have announced they're no longer going to make digital SLRs. They're moving everything to mirrorless. So we will be forced to switch over. And when it comes to like what camera to enter in, because so many people are selling their digital SLRs, there's never been a better time to buy a really almost mint perfect used one. And so you can find used D850s on KEH.com. So just the letter KEH.com. You can find these cameras for $1,500 and they look like they just came out of the box. And, you know, when we bought them, they were more like $4,000. So KEH.com has never let us down. We buy a lot of used equipment from there. One of my West Shore students was just buying a D810 from there yesterday and got it, I think, for under $1,000. So highly recommend that. When we buy new, we like to buy from the camera shop in Muskegon. Craig owns that store and 4 others in the state. And we just call him up or his staff and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. And they order it and they ship it right to us here at the gallery. So if you're buying new, we recommend the camera shop on Henry Street. And if you're buying used, we recommend KEH.com. In terms of mirrorless, that is the wave of the future. And there are a lot of cool features that it does allow. I'm not an expert in it because I haven't owned one or spent a lot of time with one. But my dad and Rachel and I were just talking about my dad possibly upgrading to either the Fuji or the top dog, the Hasselblad mirrorless. And it's almost a medium format. It's like 102 megapixels. When you get that German lens quality with those Hasselblad lenses, it's hard to beat. So that is kind of where we will head, but you know, those cameras and lenses are ultra expensive. So and when there's 3 of us, that gets pretty pricey. So we'll take our time making the transition. And in terms of sizes of lens or of sensors, resolution and megapixels is the king. So the more resolution a camera has, that's what I would go with if you can afford it. You know, you pay for what you get, and full frame is better than cropped. And then a full frame 102 megapixel Hasselblad is going to be better than 48 megapixel D850 in terms of resolution and dynamic range and color and sharpness and all of those things. So it's a money game, and this stuff is very expensive, but that's why we recommend buying used. And a D850 or a D810 has enough quality, or the Canon versions, the high-end marks, They have enough quality to make billboard pure Michigan images out of, or massive triptychs like we sell here in the gallery. So you don't need 102 megapixels, but that is the wave of the future.
Someone asked the question in terms of free editing and batching software, if you have any recommendations. I'm sure you have some professional software you're using to manage your 500,000 images on your server, but
Yeah, we use Adobe Bridge, which is the file browsing software, and then we use Adobe Photoshop. We don't use Lightroom. Bridge and Lightroom, or Bridge and Photoshop, are kind of the top dogs, and Lightroom is a combo of the two. They all work really well, but I started on Bridge and Photoshop, so that's where we've stayed. In terms of free stuff, I am not sure. Google seems to always be putting out really good stuff. I don't know if Apple has any proprietary software that's free. Most Apple things are not free, so I doubt it. But again, that'd be a good question for searching in Google or going to YouTube and searching in there for free software that is good for photo editing.
as I know some people are dropping off, I just want to make a note that as Brad said, the video that he showed at the beginning that you weren't able to hear the sound, he's going to put that out on their website, correct? Or so you're going to
We'll put it out on Facebook. I'll
Okay.
do that tonight. And
Okay.
then next week when we get back from Florida, we'll get it up on our YouTube channel as well.
All right, and I'll also have Brad send it to me. You will be getting a link. We are recording this, and I will attempt to edit out what was shown this evening and put in the one with sound as well. I'm going to try to ask all to unmute. You certainly do not have to unmute, but I'm going to open it up that if somebody did not want to type in a question into the chat session, that you're able to ask it verbally. And so you may have something pop up on your computer to unmute. You can ignore it unless you would like to ask a question, in which case you can choose to unmute. There is a question in terms of what do you recommend for storage?
Storage is hard because it's always changing. We used to back up to portable hard drives and take those off premise. So every night before we left work, we would back up stuff. And then we also burned hard copies on CDs and DVDs. Our computers now don't even have CD or DVD burners or players. So that technology is gone. So we do all of our stuff server-based. And we have a server here at the gallery, and then we have one off-premise that backs everything up. And there's that. I know a lot of people use the cloud or different cloud services, and that can work well. I don't know if total cloud would work for somebody with the volume of work we have. That might get pricey, but cloud stuff is, again, going to be the wave of the future. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
there's a question in terms of the image behind you on your right. How long did the processing in Camera Raw and Photoshop take?
Right. So that would be this one. When the light is extraordinary, those are actually the photos that take the least amount of time. It could be a maximum of a 2-minute process. Generally, the first thing and the most time-consuming thing is getting all the sensor spots and sensor dust off of the image and spotting it. But there is no substitution for magic light or magic color. And so the images that when Mother Nature is at her best and doing the work for you, there's very little processing. So if you take our advanced workshop, you'll learn our presets in Camera Raw. And so every image that downloads into our system, it automatically puts those moves on it. And then I hit enter, I open it in Photoshop. I do a few things, generally spotting, resizing, that kind of thing. And then if an image needs more work, it's generally because the light wasn't as good. And there are images, especially with water ripples or different things that can take a lot more time. The images with fog are by far the most time consuming. Getting a foggy image to look correct in a digital world is very difficult. But on these two images, the lighthouse and the sunset, it was no more than 2 minutes from the time I downloaded it until it was what we call our master TIFF, our babies, because Mother Nature did all the work for me.
When I see you out, or your dad taking photos and so forth, I'm often wondering how long, what's the longest that you've ever been out to try to get the perfect photo?
So I don't know if you can see that Little Point Sable shot there. We call that storm light. It's one of my dad. It's in his top 3 best-selling images of his whole life. And he drove 40 minutes from Ludington to Little Point Sable 5 days in a row. And each day waited over an hour and a half. And on the 5th day, after 100 minutes, the light finally broke through, started hitting the lighthouse. He started shooting. And this was back on the film in like 1993. Then a few seconds later, a second beam of light came and it lit the dune grass right in front of him. And so both the lighthouse and the dune grass were lit. The whole scene was lit. He got 2 frames off, so 2 slides, 2 35mm slides. And then the light changed and the lighthouse went in the dark. So 5 days, at least an hour and a half each day. And on the 5th day, after 100 minutes, he was rewarded with that scene.
Pretty cool. Does anybody have any questions for Brad? There are no questions remaining in chat. I don't believe that I haven't seen. There are a few people that are unmuted. If anybody does want to ask a question before we wrap up. Not having anybody step forward with a question. So thank you very much, Brad, for doing this Zoom session again this year. The last one you did was, I think you and your dad kicked off our series in 21 with the first Zoom session that we did. And this is now our 3rd year. And we have 4 more sessions scheduled that people are that are free, and I'll encourage people to participate. Someone said that Bill did, which I assume means that there's
Bill had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
That would be me. How are you, Brad?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Wish we had more snow to shoot.
Yes, amen.
We've got nothing here in Bay City.
Good luck.
Anyway, what I always see you with the flash on the camera. How often do you use that?
I use the flash a lot more than most outdoor photographers, I would say. I have the flash set to TTL, and then I have my camera body to fire the flash in rear sync. So at the end of the exposure, so whether it's a fraction of a second or 30 seconds, at the end of the exposure, it will fire the flash. So on a long exposure, you see the flash fire at first, and all that is doing is taking a meter reading. Then the camera is sitting there recording light, and then at the end of the exposure, it's flashing the flash. And what that ends up doing is, like with the water shots, where a wave is coming in at us, and we're shooting the sunset, we're right down at the water's edge, you get a mix of moving water and a mix of still water, because the flash acts like a strobe light, and it freezes any movement for just a fraction of a second. So you could have 30 seconds of movement and a fraction of a second of still, and it just creates a really cool effect that honestly we do it because we like how it looks and feels, and it sells really well. I kind of perfected it, taught it to Rachel, and now she does it probably even better and more often than I do. And then my dad, he generally, because of the weight, issues with his shoulder and neck, he has his flash in his bag, but he doesn't put it on the camera, but he does use it more than a lot of people. When he uses his flash, he's usually using one of those bungee cords where it's attached to the hot shoe on the top of the camera and then to the bottom of the flash. Camera's on the tripod. He can put it on a 10-second time delay mode, hit the shutter, and then he can move, let go of the tripod, and get 5-6 feet away and give directional light to whatever scene he's photographing. So my dad is a master of wildflowers. He'll light them up with that flash, or even like a fawn or some wildlife. You can hit them with a flash and make their eye pop a little bit. So we use flash much more often than I would say most outdoor photographers. The key to using flash, though, is to not make it look like you used flash. When somebody looks at the image, unless they are a really good photo investigator, they shouldn't automatically think, oh, they used flash. If they understand the mechanics of it, they're like, the only way they got this is with flash. That's the objective.
Thank you.
Yep, good question.
Any other questions? Again, Brad, thank you for tonight's presentation, and say hi to your dad from all of us.
Yeah, I will.
Enjoy your time in Florida with your dad and Debbie, and hopefully you'll get a little bit more sun than you've had in West Michigan in the last month.
Amen. Yes. Well, thank you all. Have a great night. We'll see you out at the park.